This is a video about diagnosing engine sound versus accessory drive sounds. So when I say accessory drive sounds, power steering pump, alternator, water pump, anything really on the serpentine belt system. Um, this vehicle came in with a distinctive rattle, almost like a diesel engine, and it had two different multiple frequencies of noise. Customer took it to another shop and they said they needed a new timing belt, which this is a 2.4, really just has a timing chain. So the sound that it was making would almost sound like a timing belt issue, timing belt rattle. And the sound was more than the VVT sound if you were running dirty oil. So for the folks that are familiar with Chryslers, it's a very distinctive sound that is prevalent in the Patriots, Jeep Patriot, and some of the Wranglers. And I'll go over what I did to diagnose it. So this is going to be kind of a general video on how to diagnose engine sound versus accessory drive sound. So the easiest way is to remove the serpentine belt, totally remove the belt, start the engine. See if the noise goes away. If the noise goes away and the engine sounds pretty decent, then you know it's going to be related to something on the serpentine on the accessory drive system. If you're still hearing a noise, then you can dig a little bit deeper. So that's the fastest and easiest way if you're a shop and just trying to give the customer a quick diagnosis of what it is with a little bit more certainty than using a stethoscope, an automotive stethoscope. You can pick these up at Harbor Freight for under $10, or you can make one with a hose, just putting it up to your ear, or my favorite, part of a transmission cooler line that has a piece of metal at the end and a part for your, and then a hose part to stick on your ear. So you got to be careful though because of the way the noise travels. So this is one way to kind of pinpoint where the noise might be coming from, and a lot of this stuff takes time to figure out what noises you're hearing, but that's the start. So this one was a tricky one that I started doing a video as I was doing it, but it was pretty long and somewhat boring, and I thought maybe I'll just do a quick case study at the end for folks that are having issues, and I'll try to in the summary just tell you the quick things to look at. So this particular one had a power steering pump noise. Well, let me just say the noise, once I took the serpentine belt off, there was the VVT sound, and the oil in this thing was horrible. So I changed the oil in it, and that helped with the sound, but this thing is going to need a bunch of oil changes to get it cleaned up. It looks like it's been following the crazy, change it every 10, 20,000 miles, or I don't even know. But the engine was tar, engine oil was tar, and that just doesn't work well with these type of VVT, variable valve timing engines. So there was that noise, but the rattle was different because it sounded like this Jeep had a diesel engine in it. So some vehicles could do that noise with the tensioner. The tensioner getting loose and kind of rattling, the spring on it getting loose and rattling. So I was able to put the stethoscope on there. There was a sound there. The idler pulleys were also loose. The bearings were loose, so there was some sound there. Really at the end, it was almost like through the parts cannon at this thing, because there was a little bit of noise with the tensioner, a little bit of noise with the idler pulleys, the 2 pulleys, and that's why in the service manual or even at the parts store they recommend once you change the tensioner to change the 2 pulleys. But the noise was more distinctive and it was up here. There was a power steering pump noise, and the system here was just having infinite air. It was just aerating the power steering fluid. Now when I first looked at this, the power steering fluid was brown and nasty and very dirty. So because I heard the noise here and the rattle in the back here and then the rattle in the line too, I was pretty certain, pretty confident that it was the power steering pump. And for folks that have been in the auto repair business here, for some reason the power steering pumps, no matter whether you're getting a remand or a new one, it's like I don't know, seems like more than a 20% failure rate. So I went through a couple of power steering pumps before I got one that was pretty good. And then I was finding I was having additional issues, and the issues that I was having that I was able to kind of troubleshoot was I was still getting some noise, and I found that my supply line, so the low pressure suction line from the reservoir, was leaking a little bit. And on this system it looks a lot like this, and it was this O-ring right here. So even though the new power steering pumps came with a new O-ring, the O-rings just weren't sufficient, and it was leaking. I'll show you how I found out it was leaking. And then the high pressure side also has 2 O-rings. It has an O-ring on this side where this screws in, and then on this tube here. This particular vehicle did have a leak on the side going into the rack and pinion, so it was possibly also sucking in air through there. So I replaced the line, so it was more than the O-ring, and then finally, after I got a decent power steering pump that was actually operational, and then vacuum mount the system, I was able to eliminate the sound in this system. Now I'll show you what I did to test the power steering pump. So the power steering pump got tested by removing the serpentine belt and then applying power. Now on these Jeeps, it's a perfect fit right in here. So I could show you right to the drive. It was a 6mm, and I was able to spin the power steering pulley there without the engine to make sure I had a good setup and that my power steering pump was working. So that was done, and then to show you what I did with figuring out the vacuum leak, I had to apply vacuum to the system. You can make your own, you could buy one, whatever, but if you use the Maddox here from Harbor Freight, this adapter set gives you these pieces here, which then allow you to put this on top of the reservoir. So this would go inside, take the cap off, put this in the reservoir. If you were clever or like to customize or make things, you could probably do something with the cap, but I just used what I had. And then I used the adapter from the radiator pressure test kit, but then didn't use the pressure pump, and then used this setup here. So this is a vacuum pressure hand pump kit, also Maddox, and I was able to apply vacuum. And the way this works on this is one way is vacuum, one way is pressure. And I saw I wasn't able to hold vacuum and it was difficult to figure out where it was leaking. So I applied pressure, not too much pressure, 10 to 15 pounds, and then I saw where it was leaking on the suction side of the power steering pump. So anyway, and for the folks that work with power steering pumps, they know, you know that this is actually a pretty common issue. You want to just make sure your O-rings and stuff are good. So power steering pump got figured out, fixed the tensioner and the pulley, and then there was still another sound. Now the sound, it did sound a little bit different, not quite like a diesel truck. So this one sounded like a diesel engine because it was a combination of different rattles. There was still one other sound. So these vehicles here have a alternator with a clutch setup in it, and that was also rattling. Again, it was just kind of eliminating sound step by step. So that was the final piece, and that's the common piece for these vehicles. A lot of vehicles won't have possibly 4 or 5 different things making sound, but maybe they would. And then once this was the last piece that was replaced, that eliminated all the noise. The other thing I wanted to go over here real quick, I think I'll just add a couple little nuggets here to help with tooling and such for something like this. A quick way to make your own little serpentine tool is, and I say serpentine tool, serpentine belt removal tool, is weld a 3/8 socket on the end of a combination wrench, the right, with the right size that you need. So let's say you were doing this, and you're trying to achieve essentially a 3/8 on one side. You're going to do something like this. You're going to weld that and then grind it, so it's going to look like this. And then that gives you the ability to have a double jointed, essentially, tool like this. And then if you have a ratchet that's 2 double jointed here, you can pretty much get onto your nut. And then on this one here, it'd be on the tensioner. This particular vehicle is a 16-inch, and you can remove it. So that's a quick tool or kind of tip. As far as O-rings go, I always have like a little box and kit of them, so I ended up using some of those. And another thing that you want to double check, which I did, was that you want to make sure that none of the bolts got loose. So if anything got loose, and let's say the alternator was loose or the power steering pump was loose, any of the bolts, it would make that rattling noise. So you want to look at that. And then I just use a borescope camera, try to look at all the bolts. So that's what that is right here. And that is how I fix this one. So it took a little bit of time, just going through it systematically. I told the customer that it was the power steering pump during the initial diagnosis, and that only resolved some of the noise. I also put in an inline filter here on the return line, and part of the solution on this one too was I did a couple of oil changes to help with all the sludge and stuff that he's got in here. This vehicle just wasn't maintained, and right now, if I were to run it, it's pretty quiet. You just hear the VVT rattle, and it's so minimal with this cover on that it is very quiet, almost as quiet, actually as quiet as running it without the serpentine belt. All right.